Stream audio test. Stream audio test.
Good morning. I'm John Riper, and it's absolutely fantastic to see this many people who meant this much to Jake Jacobson during his lifetime. I should have a microphone on, so if somebody's not hearing me in the back, raise your hand and I'll speak louder, because sometimes I don't speak as loud as needed to project. My name's John Riper. I'm Jake's personal representative, and I'm your host this morning. We have here today a collection of Jake's friends to come tell you their stories about Jake and to give you some insight into parts of his life that you might not otherwise know about. Our first speaker is Dr. Orion Wells. Dr. Wells is a practicing physician in Seattle, and he's also the bishop of the Church of Latter-day Saints congregation that encompasses Mercer Island. Dr. Wells.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate that kind introduction. It is with profound humility and love that I stand before you, both as a bishop and as a friend who had the privilege to serve alongside Jake for several years. Today we celebrate a life defined by unwavering service, by deep compassion, and by a heart that is wholly devoted to others. Jake passed away peacefully on March 30th at the age of 82. In his lifetime, he exemplified what it means to live a life of purpose and grace. Whether serving his country as a Navy veteran, dedicating his talents as an attorney, or guiding his community during his 2 admirable terms on the Mercer Island City Council, Jake's legacy is one of capable leadership and of steadfast dedication. His professional accomplishments were not separate from who he was as a man of faith. Each role he embraced was marked by a genuine desire to uplift, to serve, and to include each person that he encountered. For those of us blessed with the opportunity to work with him within our church, his impact was profound. Jake served as in several bishoprics, and his guidance as a counselor to our bishops was both wise and compassionate. His counsel always went beyond the administrative and the mundane, and it touched the hearts of those who sought solace and direction. Moreover, his role as a liaison to our Island Crest Ward, which is our Mandarin-speaking congregation that meets in our Mercer Island building, exemplified his sincere commitment to inclusion. Jake built bridges of understanding, of love, and ensuring that every member, regardless of language or background, felt the warmth and the acceptance of our spiritual community. As I reflect upon our time together, I am reminded of a spiritual reference to the covenant path, which is a journey of service, faith, and love towards God for his children. Jake walked this path with humility and with purpose. He not only inspired us through his actions, but also through his quiet and steadfast example. He taught us the true meaning of discipleship. His commitment was evident in every decision that he made, every conversation, every prayer, and every moment of service. In his public service, whether it was in the halls of city government or in the quiet moments of prayer with his fellow congregates, Jake consistently put the needs of others before his own. It is this spiritual selflessness that has left an indelible imprint on our hearts. I can speak with certainty that his legacy will continue to guide us as we seek to emulate his love and example in our own lives. While we grieve the physical loss of our dear brother, let us remember that his spirit, his enduring legacy of love, compassion, and service is not confined to the boundaries of this life. In the eternal perspective of faith, Jake has joined those who have gone before him. May we each find comfort in our shared memory, as in a knowledge that our lives are enriched by the example Jake set for every person he came in contact. I invite us to all honor Jake by continuing to live lives marked by service, inclusion, and unwavering faith. His leadership in both the church and in the community is a beacon of light that will continue to shine long into the future. May we go forward with gratitude, carrying Jake's memory in our hearts, and strive each day to reflect the love and service that he so generously shared with all of us. I say these words in the name of Christ. Amen.
Jake and I grew up in the same place, Palo Alto. I came up a few years after he did, but we went to the same schools. Can you hear? Let's try this microphone. So Jake and I grew up in the same place. That was Palo Alto. I came up a few years after he did, but we went to the same schools. We hung out in the same places. We had the same teachers. And I can tell you that years later, those teachers remembered Jake. Now, they didn't remember him because he played on the Jordan Junior High School basketball team. And they didn't remember him because he played on the Pali High football squad. They didn't even remember him because in his senior year, he was elected class president. What they remembered was a young fellow who was very nearly as likely to be sent to detention for playing hooky or playing a prank on somebody as for acing a test or getting an A+ on an essay. It was that dichotomy in Jake that they remembered. But at that same time, in those early years of his, Jake found a sense of value in how he perceived people that remained a constant for his entire life. Jake grew up in the same neighborhood as the most famous garage in American history. That's the garage that Bill Hewlett and Gary Packard founded Hewlett-Packard in. But to Jake, that was just a house that he bicycled by every day on the way to his paper route. In the years after he left Palo Alto, Steve Jobs bought a house 2 blocks to his south and moved in. The billionaire Gary Eliason of Oracle bought a house 2 blocks to the west and moved in. In the days of the 49ers Super Bowl heyday Super Bowls, their quarterback, Steve Young, lived 1.25 blocks away from where Jake lived. And you know what? He didn't care about any of that. It wasn't even trivia to him. But if we asked him, who was important in your neighborhood, he would have told you right away, his next door neighbor. It was his generosity, his neighbors, that allowed his family and Jake to maintain a vegetable garden on the neighbor's land. Now, we all know Jake loved to garden in his adult life. And that was where he grew his first tomatoes. Now, I can give you 2 concrete examples of what Jake saw as merit and value in people. Back in those days, there was just one good bookstore in town. That was Shirley Cobb Books. Shirley Cobb opened her store in 1938, and she kept it going for 50 years until her health made that impossible. Everybody in Palo Alto knew Shirley Cobb Books. It was right in the middle of University Avenue. And everybody who liked books knew Shirley Cobb because she was always there. But what everybody didn't know was that Shirley Cobb was the estranged daughter of baseball player Ty Cobb. She didn't want people to know that. She told very few people that fact. But Jake was one of those people. Now, if Jake were here among us, he would be different from all the rest of us in at least a couple of ways, and I can tell you one of them. Unlike all of the rest of us, Jake knew Ty Cobb. Jake met Ty Cobb. He met him as a boy, and he would fetch golf balls for him at a local driving range. Now, Ty Cobb, in the years after baseball, got just filthy rich because he made some investments that turned out really well. And he retired and lived a pretty secluded life in Atherton, California, which even back then was an enclave for rich people that was a little bit north of Palo Alto, where Jake lived. And now here in 2025, it's very difficult to describe what a titanic figure in American culture Ty Cobb was 75 years ago. But I'll try. Ty Cobb was on the ballot for the very first induction into the Hall of Fame. Babe Ruth was on that ballot. Honus Wagner was on that ballot. Other legends of the game were on that ballot. And unlike nowadays, in that first vote, veteran players got to vote for who deserved to be in the Hall of Fame and who didn't. And when those first ballots came in and they were tallied up, well, of course, Babe Ruth had enough to get in. Ty Cobb had enough to get in. Honus Wagner had enough to get in. But in terms of who got the most votes, it was Ty Cobb. And it wasn't close. Among the people that knew Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb and the others, Ty Cobb was the man who was the most talented baseball player ever to step onto a diamond. And this was back when baseball truly was the national pastime. Now, when Jake met Ty Cobb, although still a boy, he knew all that. He knew about the wealth. He knew about the fame. He knew about the notoriety. And it didn't matter to him. I knew Jake for almost 50 years. I never once heard him brag that he knew Ty Cobb. But he would tell you, and anybody else, about Shirley Cobb and what a wonderful contribution she was to the community. Shirley Cobb believed that if there was a book worth owning, it was worth owning in hardcover, and that was all she would sell. She fostered in Jake the same love of books. And when he passed on, he left in his house on Mercer Island nearly 1,000 volumes, almost every one of them hardcover. Our next pair of speakers are Rob Norton and Lee Spencer. Rob went to university at Princeton, and after he graduated, he served in the Marine Corps for 3 years in Vietnam. And then he spent his professional career with Pfizer, the enormous pharmaceutical company. He worked in their human resources division, which for any large company is essential to attracting and maintaining top-level talent. And once he'd started at Pfizer in human resources, they promoted him again and again and again until he was head of the whole division. And when they couldn't promote him anymore there, they made him executive vice president of the company. After Rob, Lee Spencer will talk with us. Lee went to Princeton University, and after he graduated, he went to Yale Law School. But once he had his law degree, he spent a long stint as an official in the SEC. And then he switched over to private practice, and he became a partner in one of the nation's premier law firms, Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher in New York City. But first, Rob Norton.
Good morning, everyone. Princeton class of 1965. That was Jake's class. That was my class. That was our class. And for a few minutes, we'll give you a window in, make you honorary members of the class of 65. We're clearly one of the finest classes in Princeton's history, and we're also fairly unsufferable about that. And that probably will show. But to talk about it in very simple terms, many of us have known each other north of 60 years. That is a lot of water over many dams. I'll just spend a few minutes bringing you some Jake-related highlights of our undergraduate years. Really, well, that's only 4 of the 60-plus years we all spent with him. I was particularly up close and personal to Jake during senior year when we shared a bedroom in a turret in a huge tower that centered the old campus over Blair Arch, an iconic medieval fortress, kind of like Disneyland. We had immense drawing rooms, what were really party spaces, but we had octagonal-shaped bedrooms, most of which were in turrets that had no right angles in them, not a one. But take charge, Jake, without any consultation with me, went ahead and organized the whole damn thing. Went out and got the stupidest looking bunk bed I've ever seen and jammed it into a corner and told me when I showed up, you get the bottom, I got the upper. And he had a magnificent approach to getting to the upper. He would put his foot on my bed, my space, and launch up into the air. Can't you see it? Midships he would land. I've never really gotten over that. We were just fighting about that last summer. Just no respect. You know, Jake really didn't want to go to Princeton. A graduate of Palo Alto High School, he grew up loving California, really loving Stanford, but his dad worked there. He loved the sunshine and he really loved the Pac-10. I used to listen to that ad nausea. His father, as senior dean at Stanford, vetoed the Stanford option, so the backup school, Princeton, got the nod. He got off to a fairly rocky start, trying to get organized. Didn't really understand the East Coast at all. So he came to Princeton, New Jersey several days early to get organized and adapt to the East Coast. He found his assigned room on a very hot and humid day in New Jersey with the help of his dormitory attendant, more popularly called the janitor. No AC, no fans, no bloody furniture, not a stick. He bitched about the lack of amenities given what he thought was a pretty high cost of going there. But he soon learned the obvious, that boardroom and tuition means just that. Who mentioned furniture? The janitor told him that beds, mattresses, desks, and chairs, all thoroughly used, by the way, would be available on a sale under the trees in a few days as long as it wasn't raining. Jake decided to major in politics, a faithful and prescient choice. In fact, Jake majored in politics his entire adult life. I'm sure all of us here have felt like his constituent in one way or another over the years. Not pawns on a chessboard, rather collaborators, partners, or even co-conspirators on occasion. He showed amazing organizational and political skills as he entered the university's workforce in food services as a waiter, carrying food. By his senior year, he was running the entire student workforce. You don't know I can't describe how big a job that was. It's probably more important than half the deans in the school. He had power, and he worked his way up, and he gave us some nice fringe benefits as we lived in the tower together. We used to have catered dinners with our dates up on the roof. Not bad. I'm sure we didn't pay anything extra for it. You know, the word politics conjures up all kinds of negatives in the minds of many people. Connivers, crooks and thieves, influence peddlers, etc. Jake and I talked about politics a lot, and we didn't see it that way. Good political skill helps make things happen, important things. I worked in a big corporate business type operation. Jake in a very different kind of operation, but we all talk the same language. The ability to engage individuals at all levels, to make friends, and yes, influence people, and gain allies in strategic places, to forcefully lead when you have to communicate effectively, to make decisions courageously. Those are the political skills which make the world go round. He had them. I'm told I had a few, but I took notes watching that dude. He was always organized, amazingly quick on his feet. I mean, you couldn't nail him if you tried. And he had that twinkle in his eye as he moved from challenge to challenge. Get up for it. That was his call. Get up for it. If you hung with Jake, you saw things happen. Jake had a fascination with a famous New York power broker. I don't know if any of you folks have read about him, but Robert Moses was probably the most important power broker in urban planning in America. This guy, an engineer and a lawyer, ended up controlling the entire infrastructure of New York City. Streets, bridges, tunnels, beaches, you name it, he did it. And he wrote the charters as the lawyer working on task forces, and he couldn't be touched for 30 years. Amazing thing. And Jake said, he really knew how to get it done. And he read the book again. Now, I got to get to the other side of Jake, because he had plenty of opportunities as a freewheeling undergraduate at Princeton. And let's face it, we hadn't quite reached our maturity level with that. And sometimes Jake was referred to as Black Jake. He was adventurous, always pushing the envelope, not overly impressed by the concept of in locus parentis, is what Princeton thought they were. Remember, this was an all-boys men's school. The social climate was jaded, to say the least. One social life was a series of highs, lows, midweek adventures, party weekend extravaganzas, and road trips to anywhere. It brought out the beast in some of us. So Jake's name became linked to some nefarious, almost sinister events, hence Black Jake. Drinking a beer or two on campus was easy. Getting served in town was a little more challenging. He and a few allies found a small bar close to Nassau Street that would serve room temperature draft beer for 10 cents a glass. Think about that. Really awful. Later on, he faithfully moved up market to what in a stretch one might call a tavern. A little bit down the street, and with the added bonus of serving us lads after hours by appointment. Thoroughly illegal. This place was known as Pete's. It was considered a coup of sorts, flouting of regulations and laws if you wanted to get petty, but a modest departure from what was going on campus anyway. And I participated in it, so it must have been okay. My football career had died, so I was free to do what I wanted to do. Faithfully, these ongoing arrangements led our hero to New Jersey racketeering, also known as gambling. Jake was soon running a campus-wide football pool based on Las Vegas odds. It became very popular. I saw large amounts of cash in our turret bedroom on the weekends. Princeton had a great football team and were winning by large margins. We had a game against Penn. who was particularly awful that year. And the line was Princeton by 4 touchdowns. Us smart guys all bet against Princeton. Doesn't sound right now, but if you had any sense, that's what you did. It seemed like a sure thing. But there we were in the fourth quarter. Princeton's up by 4 touchdowns and marching down the field, driving for another. Oh my God, they're going to cover the spread. The large crowd, who were surprisingly still there, because if you're ahead by 4 touchdowns, you're long gone having a party up the street. They're all watching. Really weird. They started chanting for the Penn defense to hold that line. Very suspicious. This weird behavior, we think, started a breach. Princeton President Goheen was in the stadium, and not a swinging dude. He was no fool. So, a real problem. The next week, after that game, Blair Tower was visited by government agents looking for Jake. They interviewed him in our turret and took him into custody, marched him right out of there. And as he left, he cried to me, "Call Pete, call Pete." So we did, and he was sprung, because the bad guys have better lawyers than the good guys. But that's what you call, in my book, a close call. I'm running out of time, but Jake would be really unhappy if I did not mention the Saratoga Springs caper. Statute of limitations have run out, boys, so don't get nervous over there. A classic road trip. This one to Skidmore, where the girls were. Fortunately, I missed this one. I had a serious relationship to a woman over there, so I didn't go. But the headlines from this weekend included disorderly conduct, a battered payphone, petty theft of a jacket that just happened to belong to a police officer, short-term incarcerations, uncouth language, as the men, and most amazingly, the emergence of one imaginary Jesse Jones. An existence of a person that just came out of nowhere. He turned into his principal in the proceedings. Young Jesse had to answer a court order to appear later on. He appeared and escaped. I leave you to guess where Jake fit into all of this. All I can tell you, he did. I guess you could say we're a band of brothers sometimes and a band of miscreants other times at Princeton, but the bonds took hold and Jake was a real leader in the pack. We are all very, very close, in case you can't tell. I forget about a year what the circumstance was, but I was with Jake and he came up to me and he said, "I love you. I love Janice. I love the whole damn family." Just completely caught me off guard. I'm from New England. I'm not used to stuff like that. I wondered if he was feeling his mortality because he had issues. Well, we graduated, back to the Princeton story. We all crossed the finish line and departed Princeton University. Many went to the military, some quickly to war. Many went to graduate school, including law and medical. Some went to marriage chapel, some to real work. But Jake got on his Harley and headed west. Can't you see him? Along the way, he stopped at Brigham Young to check out their highly touted law school. He quickly decided that BYU was too buttoned up for his state of mind. Cigars and cycles were problematic, so he kept driving and eventually signed up for Navy OCS. It's ironic that while he took a pass on the Mormon welcome at a young age, he found spiritual comfort and peace later with the Church of the Latter-day Saints. His work with the young people that were going on missions, he used to talk to me all the time about it. He loved it, and I think it made a real difference to those people. So one chapter in the legend is over. I'm done now. I've got tons of more material. I'd be happy to meet with you off the record outside, pass on some more. I love you, bro. I miss you. Over to my colleague, Lee Spencer.
Good afternoon. Rob was Jake's roommate his senior year. Rob and I were roommates our freshman year. And being a lawyer, I'm not going to go into that. I'm simply going to note the existence of the statute of limitations. Leave it at that. I want to thank our host, John, for putting this together this evening, and certainly the city of Mercer Island sponsor and its mayor. I think the care and attention you've displayed in bringing us all here, I understand to be characteristic of the administration as a whole right now. Jake Jacobson, born with a golden heart in a golden state. He was a man of the West who came to the East. First coming to the East in 1961 to be a pillar of old Nassau, Rob has just well described the web of friendships that Jake began there that flourished over 60 years. We do not make new old friends. Friendships, I think, are a fabric of a rich color woven on looms of shared values and recurring venues. For Jake and we as classmates, there are two such venues I want to mention today. One is a winter's tale, the other a summer story. A winter's tale. A half century ago, our friend Griff Sexton began hosting a classmate or two shortly before Christmas at his club, the New York Athletic Club in the city. I recall joining in over 40 years ago, and Jake came in shortly thereafter. The event grew to over 25 people every year shortly before Christmas, although it has now dwindled through the passage of life and time. The format is constant. We meet at the bar in the tap room of the New York Athletic Club, Coffee View. We then adjourn to a communal table, tell lies and other stories, and then we adjourn to the pool room. And yes, there is sin in River City. Sinners where we all pool. And Jake then introduced a constant. He would always win, or at least tie, for the person coming from the furthest point, Seattle at that point, and he decided to start holding a dinner the night before at a good restaurant, typically a Greek restaurant, sometimes other, where the fly-ins came and a couple of us locals. And we had dinner with, we swapped tales, new and old, and then came the bill. Jake just picked that up. The rest of us never saw it. And the purpose of that and the importance of that to us wasn't the money. It was the sheer sign of friendship. That was Jake. A summer tale, summer story. Over a quarter century ago, my wife Alice and I were approached in our summer home in Stowe, Vermont, by the Stowe Land Trust, which is a fine local conservation and environmental organization. They asked us if we would host a charitable golf tournament on their behalf, and we said yes, we would be happy to do that. And a core group from that same Princeton Christmas crowd started coming and have become pillars of the event. St. Griff, Jake, Rob, Carl Egge, who will speak later, Hugh Durden, who is here, and others. The format of the tournament is a scramble and teams are assigned. You don't come into a team. So you're meeting new people each year. So you make new friends. And we know Jake made $1 million. And every year, I would have been approached by people there in store saying, is Jake coming? And I would say, yes, indeed. And so we would. And Jake would typically fly to the Massachusetts coast, meet up with Rob. They would drive over and come to our house, and Jake would always bring flowers, and the fragrance still lingers. Jake loved flowers, as we know. I think flowers love Jake. And the evening before the tournament, there is a Calcutta, which most of you know. Teams are assigned, you bet on your teams, and there's a felt compunction to buy your own team. So what do your friends do? They insert bids to make sure you pay up. And I did, and Jake was a master of that art. And the friends Jake made in that tournament were legion, and just to mention one is Heidi Sherman. Heidi is an outstanding state representative, House of Representatives from Stowe. And both she and Jake are people with common sense, devoted to the common good. Parties are irrelevant. And they headed off, would communicate after that, and strike a real strike force for the good. And in fact, I recall the year Jake first ran for office on Mercer's Island. As I recall, he didn't take any contributions. We would have been happy to do it. He wouldn't take them. But he did bring with him a bunch of pumpkin-colored orange campaign T-shirts, if you remember them. So we all put them on, and so there was a splash of orange in green Vermont for that afternoon. And for an afternoon, we were all Mercer Islanders for the evening. There's a trophy for the overall tournament winner. Very nice. But we have our own trophy for our group who comes, called the Durden Sexton Trophy, for the lowest team among us. Jake's name is there, and it will never leave. In a few days, Alice and I will decamp from New York on our annual trek north to Vermont. As the days in June turn into July and into August, and the approach again of the 26th annual Stowe Land Trust Golf Tournament, I'll be asked again, is Jake coming? And I will answer, yes, indeed, for we, his friends, will bring him there, carrying him in our hearts. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Carl Egge. Carl went to Princeton University. You may notice a theme of this section of speakers. And then he joined the Marine Corps and served in the Vietnam War. When he got done with the Marines, he went to Cornell Law School. After graduating from law school, he joined the Bogle and Gates law firm in Seattle, one of the renowned law firms that's no longer with us. He became a partner there and then became general counsel for Russell Investments, the huge investment firm that was originally founded in Tacoma. In more recent years, he's been a senior partner with the Perkins Coie law firm, a multinational law firm with offices in Seattle, with a premier client list that begins with the Boeing Company. I give you Carl.
Thank you, John. I'm going to talk first about Jake's naval career. Then I'm going to segue to some personal reflections of my 64-year relationship with this remarkable individual. When Jake graduated from Princeton in 1965, he planned to attend law school, but was facing the likelihood of the draft into military service, most likely as a soldier in the Army. Jake noted this in a recent publication. He said, after graduation, I toured the country on my motorcycle, planning to attend Stanford Law School. When I arrived in Palo Alto, I had orders to take a physical for the draft. I decided the Navy was the best option, so he enlisted in the Navy and applied for officer candidate school. Jake's choice of the Navy proved to be fortuitous. He was commissioned as ensign, United States Naval Reserve in August 1966. Immediately, he was assigned to the USS Duncan, a destroyer patrolling Yankee Station off the coast of North Vietnam. Yankee Station, the destroyers there were engaged in bombardment of the enemy positions, but also assisting in the recovery of downed airmen in that area. One of those recovered from the water by the sailors stationed at Yankee Station was a Navy pilot and Jake's Princeton classmate, Hugh Durden. Hugh is here today. Hugh, where are you? There he is over there. He's joining us celebrating the life of this wonderful friend of ours. After 14 months aboard the Duncan, Jake returned to the United States to Tacoma, where the USS Antelope, a high-speed gunboat, was being outfitted and commissioned. He became executive officer of the Antelope, and after outfitting and training in San Diego, they departed back to Vietnam. They conducted patrol duties on the Qualong River, the Gulf of Siam, Conran Bay, and in Tonkin Gulf, part of an operation known as Market Time, an effort to try to interdict supplies that were coming in by sea to the Viet Cong forces. Jake was engaged in regular combat with Viet Cong guerrilla units while on the Antelope and was wounded in action. Following these extended tours of Vietnam, Jake was assigned as commanding officer of the USS Umpqua, a fleet support vessel based in the Atlantic. At that time, he was the youngest and most junior ship's captain in the United States Navy, an achievement of which he was justly proud. Many of you on Mercer Island have probably seen his pickup truck with emblazoned on the back USS Umpqua, ATA 209. After 18 months as skipper of the Umpqua, Jake returned to the Western Pacific for 22 months as executive officer of the destroyer Robert E. Perry. They participated in coastal operations in the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean. And then early in 1974, after nearly 9 years in the Navy, Jake resigned his commission as Lieutenant, United States Navy. Among his many medals are Purple Heart, Navy Commendation Medal, Combat Action Ribbon, the Vietnam Cross of Gallantry, and several presidential and naval unit citations for the ships that he served. Jake was very proud of his naval service, including in his extensive library at home of more than 500 treatises and historical accounts of naval and Marine Corps activities from World War II through the present day. In recognition of Jake's service to our nation, plans are underway for his remains to be interred at Arlington National Cemetery. Sorry. I've known Jake for 64 years. I'm going to share a little anecdote that, how many people have ever been in a car when Jake has been driving? Okay, you'll appreciate this. When he graduated from law school in 1977, I was already in Seattle practicing law. He applied for the admission to the Washington State Bar. He listed me as a reference. And one day I got a letter from the Bar Association questioning the integrity and honesty of one Daniel Carl Jacobson and his respect for the rule of law. Apparently there was concern about the many speeding citations Jake had amassed while residing in California. I responded that I've known Jake for more than 16 years. I had no question about his honesty and integrity and respect for the rule of law. I did say Jake was always in a rush to get things done, and that should not be misconstrued as a penchant for illegal behavior. Jake was admitted to the bar later that year. As I noted, he was my friend for 64 years. He was a college classmate, senior. I was one of that Blair Tower denizens our senior year. Fellow Vietnam veteran, Jake in the Navy, me Marine Corps. We were Seattle-based lawyers, and we each transitioned to a corporate executive role after more than 20 years of active legal practice. But most of all, our friendship grew and deepened, especially in the last decade when we ended full-time employment and began focusing on the more important things in life: family, community service, and cementing enduring friendships. Jake was Uncle Jake to my son and daughter and our grandchildren. He accompanied us to our grandchildren's baseball and basketball games and to other family events. He was loved and cherished by one and all. He was always available as my consigliere, whether regarding construction, gardening, creative recipes, travel, or simply finding the best ways to chill out. When Constance and I moved from Seattle during COVID, he insisted that we stay at Chez Jake whenever we were in town. When we planned a new vegetable garden, an unexpected package of seeds arrived, courtesy of Jake. His gift of jars of hot peppers were an annual treat. Spicy they were. Flowers were always present when we visited Jake and when he visited us. He'd always come with flowers. Dinners with Jake were special as well. His signature orzo salad with far too much garlic and hot peppers was a regular accompaniment, and a lighted candle always graced the table when we had dinner with Jake. Over the last 5 years, Jake accompanied Constance and us and me on trips to Hawaii, staying with us for up to 2 weeks, relaxing, walking the beach, enjoying sun, surf, fresh fish dinners, with his well-deserved vacation interrupted only by extensive Zoom meetings of the Mercer Island City Council. When Constance and I decided to marry, we asked Jake if he would participate as a co-officiant. He immediately agreed, and his thoughtful and personal reflections on the value of relationships was the highlight of our oceanfront Hawaiian wedding. He was a kind and thoughtful friend. I was blessed by knowing this wonderful individual for 3/4 of my life. Since his passing, when we have dinner at home, there's a lighted candle, and we toast that candle and each other in memory of a dear friend now departed. Our last conversation with Jake was after he had returned to Covenant Shores and was beginning to recover. It was a phone conversation, and it was just the afternoon before he was rushed back to Overlake Hospital. We told him how much we loved him. We were hoping and praying for his full and complete recovery. Alas, that was not to happen. Jake was my wingman. I will miss him for the rest of my days. Thank you.
Our next pair of speakers are Bill Cole and Carol Lombardini. They did not go to Princeton University. Instead, they both went to Stanford Law School at a moment in time when Stanford Law School was generally regarded as the finest in the country. Bill Cole graduated from law school and moved to LA, and he joined the Mitchell, Silberberg, and Knupp firm, a firm so well respected that they're treated like IBM, and nobody calls them by their normal name. Instead, they go by the 3 initial acronym, just like IBM is never called International Business Machine. He spent his career practicing labor law, and for most of his years in the firm, he was their managing partner. Carol Lombardini graduated 2 years after Bill did, and she likewise moved to LA and has spent her career practicing in labor law. Now, you all know something important about Carol, even though you don't yet realize it, because you'll all recall that 2 years ago, the Hollywood writers went on strike. And shortly after them, the Hollywood actors went on strike. And within days of that, the whole Hollywood industry came to a screeching halt. Well, the management side of the industry, they needed somebody to negotiate new contracts with the unions so that the strikes would end and Hollywood could get back to work. And they went to Carol to do that. It took her more than 3 months, but she got it done. The strikes ended, and Hollywood is back in action. But first, Bill Cole.
Hi, everyone. It's a little bit intimidating. Is the speaker working? I can't tell from here. Okay. It's a little bit intimidating following the Princeton crowd. Far more eloquent than us Stanford grads, I think. But I would like to also at the start here to thank John Riper and Carl Egge, who jointly put all this together. It's a lot of work and well worth it. So Jake was my best and closest friend for more than 50 years. So I have a lot to say about him. But I've been requested to discuss principally our years at Stanford, which I'm happy to do. But before I do that, I'd like to give some general impressions, my impressions of Jake as a person. He was unique. He was strong physically, even stronger mentally. He was a little gruff on the outside, but with an impish sense of humor and, most importantly, a great empathy for others. He had a broad universe of friends from all walks of life, and he had an insatiable thirst for knowledge. He was an avid reader, as you've heard already from others. He had almost scholarly knowledge of politics, history, religion, warfare, and other subjects. But at the same time, he was a practical, down-to-earth, regular guy. He loved to golf, fish, ride motorcycles, watch sports, garden, cook, and fix anything that ever broke around the house. He was as comfortable with a rake or a wrench in his hand as he was delivering a closing argument in a high-stakes litigation. And all of that was combined with his boundless energy. The guy was a force of nature. He never stopped learning, and he never stopped moving. So I met Jake early in our first year at Stanford Law School, which was in 1974. We sort of happened upon each other in the basement of the law school. We both actually were down there to have a smoke. We were both smokers in those days. Jake introduced himself to me and struck up a conversation, as he was wont to do whenever he met anybody. We quickly learned that each of us was in a living situation that we weren't happy with. Jake was actually living with his father and his father's wife, Patty, who Jake kiddingly but affectionately referred to as his, quote, fake mother. She hadn't raised him. She'd married David after Jake was out of the house. And so at 31 and having already had a career in the Navy, living at home was not going to work for Jake. I had started the semester at Stanford not late, but just before it started, and I was living in a one-bedroom apartment in East Palo Alto. And for those who know the area, East Palo Alto is not the nicest of areas. So Jake said, "Hey, should we get a place together?" I said, "Yeah, that sounds like a good idea." And shortly thereafter, we rented a small house just south of the Stanford campus. And it didn't take me very long to realize that I'd made a great choice of a housemate. So Jake was older and more mature than most of our classmates, as well as me, having had his career in the Navy between undergraduate and law school. And that proved to be a blessing to me because he didn't get caught up in the nervous frenzy of first-year law students. So we watched as many of our first-year classmates were exhibiting all sorts of neuroses as they lived together in the law dorm and fed off of each other's anxieties. And I was shielded from that atmosphere because our house turned into a meeting place for many of Jake's friends. My social life became entwined with Jake's. And those friends were more Jake's age than mine, and they provided a dose of normalcy that our classmates did not enjoy. As I'm sure many in this room have experienced, Jake loved introducing his new friends to his old friends and bringing them into his ever-growing universe of friends. As a result, during the law school years, I met and became friends with a number of people I would never even met but for Jake. And among those was a core circle of friends who became part of our everyday life during law school and remained friends from that time on. That group included a man named Jeff Wong, who was a lifelong friend of Jake's. There's a lot of interesting stories about Jeff Wong, but I'll get to one brief one later. But they had known each other from early childhood, and then one had moved away, and it went on from there. there were Brian and Susie May, who actually Jake had met through Jeff Wong. There was Ben and Robin Kwong. Robin was Jeff Wong's cousin, and Ben had gone to Palo Alto High School and was 1 year ahead of Jake there. And there were two of Jake's Princeton friends, Reed Hilliard with his wife Jane, and Tom Curto, who was affectionately known to everybody as Turtle. And two of those people, Susie May and Benny Kwong, are here today. Welcome. But as you can see, that core group that we all became such close friends, they came from different parts of Jake's life. And Jake was the center of gravity, the person who brought everybody in together. Okay, Jake was also an avid Stanford sports fan. And so he began an annual party, which included this core group, always with several other people added on from Jake's various aspects of his life. He always had other people that joined the party. And the horror show, which he named, I'm not quite sure why, but there was some horrible things that did happen now and then. But it was always tied to a Stanford football game, usually the big game, which is Stanford versus Cal. If not, it would be the SC game or the UCLA game. So that tradition of the annual horror show went on well after we left Stanford, maybe I think even decades. Always initiated by Jake. He was always the core of it. He was the center of it. And that tied our core group together for life. I said I'd have a quick story about Jeff Wong. It's to show Jake's impish sense of humor. So I came home one day to our house in Palo Alto, and Jake was baking a cake, which was not that usual. And I asked him, why are you baking a cake? He said, well, he lost a golf bet to Jeff Wong and owed him $50. So he was baking a cake filled with $50 worth of pennies. And he was going to present it to Jeff that night. And it was a very heavy cake. And Jeff was not amused. So Jake is a man of so many interests. And so there were a lot of other things he did besides socializing and studying. His Triumph motorcycle, which is the one he had at the time, was his pride and joy. He often took off on rides on it to places near and far. He'd go through the Santa Cruz Mountains to the beach. He'd go all over the place. Just loved that motorcycle. At the same time, heard a little of this, he planted a vegetable garden. We had a small little backyard, a little strip of dirt and a fence, and he had tomatoes and peppers growing all over that thing. And then he would use those that produce to make dinners for people he invited over, and we always had dinner guests. Jake always cooked. He loved to cook. In fact, as someone just said, I mean, his house in Mercer Island, much later in life, he basically had a farm in the back. He grew so much produce he couldn't use it. He was giving it away everywhere, and he was growing flowers too. So going back to school was definitely a transition for Jake, having had a successful Navy career and being a captain of a ship and all those things, and now he's being told what to do by law professors who weren't really, in many cases, that much older than him. But Jake and I were in the same small section, which at Stanford meant that you had all of your classes together. You had one small class and the other larger classes. That the group in the small section all had them together. And we watched as many of our classmates, most of whom were from very prestigious U.S. colleges, as was Jake, having been to Princeton. And they all vied to be the first one to answer every question the professor put out during class. We had that type of education where the professor would ask questions, Socratic method, and the students would answer. Where there's all these people, they put up their hands every question and they had their answers. And it felt like to us that everyone but us must have been spending every night studying for the next day's class or classes. But then finals came, the first finals in law school. And back then, I don't know if it's still true, when after finals, they posted everybody's grades in order. They put them up on a bulletin board and everybody would go over there real quickly and look at it. And Jake and I went out over there, and we found our name, pretty near the top in all of the classes. And, we traded some smug smiles with each other because we saw that most of the most vocal classmates' names were found much further down the list. And I recall that day very well because immediately afterwards, we proceeded to the nearest watering hole, which had to be more than a mile from the Stanford campus by law, by Stanford law. And we sat and drank stingers for hours, reveling in over our success. And I'm not sure how we got home, but we did. So we made it through law school, and Jake and I went separate ways. Jake north to Seattle to join the Olds Morrison firm. I went back to LA to practice law there. But as I mentioned, Jake and I remain close friends, really the closest of friends. And I left this out, but Jake and I met my wife, Carol, who'll be coming up next. When she was a first year, we were third years. And during finals time, we would study, all three of us would study up in the area of the Stanford Law Library that allowed smoking. And I'm sure it was Jake that approached Carol and bummed a cigarette or whatever, and so I'm pretty sure it was Jake that introduced me to Carol. We didn't start dating or get married until shortly after she graduated law school. Anyhow, for the rest of Jake's life, we traveled together. Brian May and I served as co-best men at Jake's wedding to Mary Tapp, who's here today. And Jake served as my best man when Carol and I got married in 1983. And of course, there were ongoing Stanford games, always every year. So there were many get-togethers. And my fondest memories of the short trips we took when Jake would just visit our house or we'd visit Jake's. That happened very frequently over the last 50 years. Anyhow, I will leave to Carol to tell the rest of our story together. But there's one final area that I'd like to mention, and that relates to Jake's love of golf. And the reason I raise it is that I didn't start golfing too much later in life, but after I did, I developed a wonderful, close-knit group of guys who love to travel and golf. And I was able to invite Jake to join us on several trips. This, in some degree, return the favor he had shown to me by bringing me into his wide circle of friends. And it was no surprise that he was universally loved by that group. He instantly became one of the lads of loyalty, as we refer to ourselves. And indeed, two of the lads are here today, Rob Richmond and Bob Hanna, Bob having traveled all the way from Mexico just to be here for the celebration. So I guess in closing, I'd like to repeat what I said at the beginning. Jake was a unique and very special person. He lived a full and fruitful life. He was an important part of our family, and he's sorely missed. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Whether you knew Jake personally or professionally, it was hard not to like him, or at least to hold him in high regard. He was a man of great intellectual curiosity, always educating himself about something new. His interests were varied and broad-ranging: history, politics, science, astronomy, gardening, cooking, and of course, sports. He was gregarious, capable of easily and almost instantly bonding with people. He regularly practiced acts of kindness. He sent birthday and anniversary cards that routinely arrived on time. During the many times Bill and I visited Jake at his home in Seattle or on Mercer Island, We never failed to meet neighbors who came by to thank him for a gift of homegrown vegetables or for the simple courtesy of picking up mail delivered in their absence. He was extraordinarily generous of spirit and means, and he particularly loved hosting dinners at his home, for which he would often prepare his signature barbecued ribs, rack of lamb, or some other manly hunk of beef he had personally selected from Don and Joe's shop at Pike's Market. He regularly invited members of the Mormon church he attended to dinner on Sundays, much, I am sure, to their gastronomic delight. Jake's background and life experiences, Princeton education, a nearly decade-long commitment to the Navy during wartime, his shift to a professional law practice, and ultimately to his service on the Mercer Island City Council, always made me think of him as a man of the world. He had to be capable of dealing assertively and diplomatically with almost any situation. Now, this is not to say that he could not be annoying or irritating. He often was, and deliberately so, I might add. In my case, recognizing that I had liberal tendencies on many subjects, he would loudly, unapologetically, and relentlessly defend his conservative political views, some that I branded far right, in ways that made him sound like he was auditioning for his own show on the Fox News channel. Now, for Jake, this was sport, a contest to see how long I could withstand his onslaught of arguments. Now, it took me a long time to figure out that it was pointless to debate him. Whenever I did, you could hear in his voice the smirk, even over the phone, on his face as he continued his diatribes, clearly pleased that I had fallen for the bait and chosen to engage so that he could justify ramping it up just another notch. Given my experience, I can only imagine what it must have been like for members of the Mercer Island City Council who did not agree with Jake's points of view. Aside from politics, Jake and I had many common interests, among them gardening, cooking, and art. When Bill and I visited, Jake often put me to work in the garden. We visited nurseries to find different types of flowers to plant in his yard. Knowing my love for flowers, he thoughtfully placed a vase of fresh flowers in the bedroom where Bill and I stayed each time we visited. After I told him that peonies were among my favorite flowers, he called to tell me how excited he was that he had obtained, perhaps stolen, a large peony bush from the yard of a home in his neighborhood that was shortly to be demolished, and he was transplanting it that very day in his own yard. He did love free stuff. Our common interests meant that we shared information. We traded recipes. We consulted on the best kitchen appliances to achieve optimal culinary results. But the unbreakable bond between Jake and me revolved around our mutual passion for shopping. And we did a lot of it when we traveled together. Now, Bill, whom you just heard, my wonderful husband of 42 years, would garner a perfect 10 rating, but for the fact that he has yet to feel the spark of joy that shopping elicits. On the rare occasions that he has accompanied me on a shopping trip, shopping trip, he would become impatient after only a few minutes. And he would want to leave as soon as we had purchased whatever item we had specifically designated to buy. When I persisted in looking at other things, he would remind me of the need to, and I quote, finish up so we can get going, unquote. But when his good friend Jake was along and reveling in shopping ecstasy, Bill's impatience and attitude turned into accommodation, my secret weapon. At last, I had found the perfect traveling companion who furnished the magic elixir that assuaged Bill's impatience with my comprehensive study of the mechanics of the global supply chain. And so Jake and I shopped. At first, shopping consisted of trips to Nordstrom, the fabulous Nordstrom flagship store in downtown Seattle, where Jake acquired an extensive wardrobe of slacks, mostly beige ones, shirts, and sport coats that hung neatly in his closet with the precision one would expect of someone with a military background. But that was only the beginning. For Jake was nothing if not a collector. Rarely did he have only one of something. In fact, I concluded that Jake's first rule of shopping was that if it was good enough to have one of something, it was much better to have many of them. Anyone who's been to his home, have you ever noticed the large number of pig figurines in his house? He even commissioned a whole set of dinnerware with pigs on them. Well, later on, we began exploring art galleries together, and Jake developed a collection of wooden African masks that were prominently displayed near the entry of his home. Eventually, he bought so many that we had to reconfigure the entire display to find space for new ones. Now, I have to confess that not all of Jake's acquisitions met generally accepted standards of good taste. On a trip to Maui with Jake's then wife, Kathy, we decided that we would make the drive from Wailea to Hana, a challenge for tourists because of the narrowness of the road and its unexpected twists. I will refrain from commenting about Jake's driving. Others have already given you an impression of what it was like, other than to say that he likely could have pursued a career in Formula One driving quite successfully. Anyway, when we arrived in Hana some hours later, Jake suggested that we visit Hilo Hattie's, a clothing store for which we had seen many roadside advertisements on the way. A short time later, he emerged from Hilo Hattie's wearing what I will charitably refer to as a bold red and white hibiscus print shirt. I do not know what became of that garish treasure, but we should all hope that it is not among the bequests in his will. The second rule of shopping that Jake observed was to pause and reflect before buying, but then go back the next day and buy. This was a function of indecision, not selectiveness, and we saw this happen many times during our travels. Now, hesitation was certainly understandable in the context of the expensive men's bracelet, generously endowed with orange sapphires, which made him think of Princeton, diamonds, and 18-karat gold that he admired at length in the posh jewelry store in Carmel that we visited in early 2024. But then there was the incident in Barcelona, where he spent a good deal of time admiring a small, not terribly expensive replica of an antique compass and calendar that revealed neither direction nor the date. In other words, a useless object. He eventually left the store. Bill and I were waiting outside for him without buying it. Except that the next morning he awakened and decided he could not live without it. So he asked that we reconfigure the course of our planned day so that we could return to the store where he would now buy the now coveted item. In Budapest, where his sister Anne joined us, we returned to an art gallery no less than 3 times, at which Jake ultimately purchased 4 paintings and a large sculpture. Rule number 3 of shopping was that no opportunity for retail therapy, as Jake called it, should ever be passed up. While we were in Marrakech, we asked our guide to take us on a day trip outside the city. He suggested we go to the Atlas Mountains, where we hiked a short distance up a mountain to a waterfall. About halfway up the path leading to the waterfall, Jake noticed a shop tucked in a cave in the side of the mountain, and of course asked if we could stop. Of course we stopped, and I thought, oh boy, what was this about? As far as I could tell, the shop had no electricity, making it necessary for the shop proprietor to remove everything from the cave and bring it out into the sunlight for the buyer to observe. It did have enough of an internet connection to process credit card purchases, however. For about the next 40 minutes, Jake looked at any number of hand-woven rugs and sculptures, finally settling on one of each, never once pausing to consider how he was going to get those bulky, weighty objects from mid-mountain back to the car where our guide awaited. But he did succeed. Recalling these events underscores the extent to which Jake's friendship enriched my life and that of my family. Doubtless, others gathered here today feel the same way. We've all had the good fortune of knowing a truly extraordinary and charismatic individual whose quirks and humor were only made him more endearing. Had I the power to grasp his indomitable spirit and create a mold to produce more Jakes, I would readily do so. But this time I'd leave out the politics.
When Jake got done with Stanford Law School, he came straight up to Seattle. I honestly can't tell you why. I asked him a number of times over the years, and he never had a very clear explanation. He may not have known himself, but he did find his way here, and he began practicing with the Olds Morrison law firm. Now, at the time, they had a very innovative program where new attorneys could keep a substantial chunk of any business that they generated on their own. And from the very start, Jake was spectacularly successful, both as an attorney and as a business generator, to the point where by his 3rd year, Jake was earning as much as some of the owners in the firm. Now, this fact was considered an intolerable heresy. And so the firm changed the rules and they slashed the program. And that meant a substantial pay cut to Jake, which he certainly was not happy about. But in later years, I always sensed in him that he was pretty darn tickled about the fact that This young lawyer, early on in his career, because of his success, had caused so much turmoil in what in a law firm was the equivalent of the establishment. During his 20 years in private practice, Jake co-founded 2 different law firms. Both of them specialized in construction law. Now, that probably sounds like a quaint and esoteric field of practice, and maybe it would be, except for 2 facts. The first is construction projects, the public projects and commercial projects that Jake tended to work on, those involve a lot of money, millions to hundreds of millions of dollars. And the second is, by its nature, construction gives rise to a lot of unexpected problems, the kind of problems that it takes even more money to overcome. Now, nobody wants to pay for unexpected liabilities, so when those problems happen, there are disputes, and that's why construction projects frequently give rise to large and vigorously contested disputes. And construction lawyers are the people that are turned to help resolve those disputes. Now, Jake had more than his share of success in victories and favorable settlements of construction disputes in his years in practice. But at the end of it, that's not what he remembered. What he remembered was the people. Now, the clients, of course, in many cases, Jake's clients had bet the company disputes. If Jake lost their case, they lost their business. But beyond the clients, Jake remembered the judges that he appeared in front of, the arbitrators that he tried disputes to, the mediators who helped get cases settled. Jake remembered other contractors and subcontractors involved in his disputes. He remembered opposing counsel who he had vigorously fought against while the cases were going on. And with all of those people, frequently, they remained as acquaintances and often friends for the rest of his life. During his construction years, Jake established an extensive network of contacts that even when he wasn't practicing construction law anymore, were among his social and professional circle. And a lot of those people are here today or watching us on the live stream. At the end of 20 years of practice in the mid-90s, Jake felt like he'd done everything he intended to do in the practice of law, and he began looking for something new. Our next speaker, Matt Osborne, is going to tell us what that turned out to be. Now, Matt went to Whitman College, and then he joined the Marine Corps. He served 11 years in the Marine Corps as an officer, including 2 tours of duty in Iraq. When he came home, he went to law school at the University of Washington, and after he graduated, he joined the Osborne Construction Company, a Pacific Northwest contracting firm that does a lot of work in Alaska and then throughout the rest of the Pacific Northwest, a firm founded by his father. Matt joined the company and worked his way up the ranks and is now president. Matt Osborne.
Thanks, John. Jake's next chapter, start with Osborne, was a very interesting departure for him from litigation. He's now coming over to the side of the client in the eyes of a lawyer. And for Jake, the transition was seamless. Jake brought to our company not only all the skills you would expect of a seasoned litigator, the ability to understand complex issues, the ability to suss out where you might go to get the best legal advice for any problems that might come up. But Jake also had a boundless appetite for new challenges. which is super important in a relatively small company like ours. Jake made himself a part of everything, every other part of the company he could help at. Any challenge that would come up, Jake was more than willing to jump in and figure out how to best help the team accomplish what we needed to accomplish. And that's probably the best thing you can have in any organization, is a team member like that. And Jake certainly brought that to us. Jake's time at the company was very interesting. His first few years, the company was going through kind of a rough patch. We had a number of projects that weren't going as well as we'd hoped. We'd had some less experienced teams that had run those. And Jake was a huge part of bringing those into as soft a landing as possible, preserving the relationships we could with ownership, fighting where we needed to pursue claims, or otherwise asserting our rights, disputing project reviews we disagreed with, and so forth, which was fantastic lead-in to the most successful period in our company's history. In about the mid-2000s, we hit a stream of projects that were fantastic that went on for the next 10 years. And Jake was involved in all aspects of that, from writing proposals and turning them in, helping close down projects. He even went and was on site for a number of months as an executive representative for the company. He had an interesting story about that. He was talking to a contracting officer about that, and the contracting officer was saying, "Well, you're not listed as a project manager." And Jake, with that characteristic twinkle, said, "Read the solicitation. I'm a company executive. Next question." So that pretty much settled that. And they went on to a very successful project. One of the things that Jake did for us that was absolutely critical, the largest project that the company had ever taken on, was a teaming arrangement between us and an outfit from out of Detroit. And that created a number of interesting issues with who is going to manage the money. And there was a number of stakeholders that needed to be satisfied. And Jake was able to fearlessly plumb the depths of the federal acquisition regulations, which is not a task for the faint-hearted. And he came up with the perfect solution that allowed us to escrow the money, satisfy the government, the teaming partners, and even our bonding company, which is, again, not very easy to do. So he really was an instrumental part of all of our success. In addition to that, Jake was one of the ones who spearheaded a phantom stock program for the company, which really showed his commitment to everybody in the company. The program enabled the company to share profits with people up and down the company ladder, and something that I know was very important to people in the company. And Jake really put a lot of time into that. That was very important to him in involving everyone in the team and the success of the company. Jake retired in 2013 and turned over the reins of a lot of what he was doing to his less able successor, being me. Jake had a funny definition of retirement because it didn't look like retirement to anybody else. If anything, he got busier as he moved on to a new chapter in his life. He stayed very involved in all of the company activities. He was always willing to help me out because I had a lot of questions. I even called him once when he was on the golf course, and after meandering through my problem, he said, "Look, I don't mean to be abrupt. I'm about to tee off. Don't do any of that. Do this instead." I said, "Okay, that's way better. I'll do what you said." So he was a fantastic help in all those things. During this period of his life, also, he was always involved in the AGC of Washington. He had been involved in that since being a lawyer in practice, but after leaving the company full-time, he worked his way through the chairs at AGC, taking on more and more leadership responsibility, and eventually being president of AGC of Washington. He was a tremendous advocate for construction across the Pacific Northwest, often testifying with the state legislature on matters of importance to everybody. He left a great mark with AGC and has encouraged a lot of AGC participation from our company. One of the things that I remember most about Jake was that he was the best mentor I'd ever met. He really had a genuine interest in helping everybody achieve their best potential. Whether it was a letter recommendation, a phone call, or in his words, he'd help kick open a door to let you go through. Jake was always there for you. He did a lot for me personally at every step in my life. I think probably the best story and the thing that I remember that really characterizes him was he wrote me a letter of recommendation for Marine Officer Candidate School that was so good, I got a call from the grizzled gunnery sergeant who said, what is this? This is the best letter I've ever seen. Who is this guy? When did you save his life? How much money do you owe him? And I said, well, I'm just lucky to know him. And that was really what our all experience at Osborne was with Jake. We were just lucky to know him and lucky to have him with us. And I think everyone here can share that sentiment. So thank you.
Our last speaker is Salim Nice. And to many of you, especially Mercer Island residents, he needs no introduction because he's the mayor of the city of Mercer Island. But even his constituents may not be aware of his career before he became mayor. Now, any of us who have dealt with the American healthcare system know that it can be a nightmare, both in terms of billing and medical insurance. And I'm here to tell you that for hospitals, it's a lot worse. There's far more regulations, there are far more hoops and mazes. And Salim invented the idea of creating what became a set of companies that help hospitals through that maze so that they can spend more of their time and resources treating their patients and less time worrying about whether they can keep their doors open because they can't cover their costs. Salim.
So just briefly before I get to my remarks, I want to recognize my council colleagues. I saw a number of them here earlier. If you could stand for me, Councilmember Reynolds, Weicker, Deputy Mayor Rosenbaum, Councilmember Lisa Anderall, Councilmember Ted Weinberg. It meant the world that Jake served with all of you, and you being here today was really, I'm sure, would have been special for him. So thank you for coming. Jake showed us what it truly means to serve a community. As someone who worked alongside him, I had the privilege of seeing every single day how deeply Mercer Island and Islanders mattered to him. Jake was first elected to City Council in 2019 at the age of 76 and re-elected in 2023 by a wide margin. That alone says a lot about the respect and trust he earned from this community. Just 2 months into his first term, the pandemic struck. In that uncertain moment, Jake stepped forward with the steady resolve of a Navy veteran. He reached out to struggling businesses, supported emergency measures, and stayed focused on what mattered most, the well-being of his community. Jake brought an impressive experience to his role as a Princeton graduate, a decorated Navy officer, as an attorney, and a construction executive. But it was his presence on the council and in the community that truly defined him. He put on his boots and his hard hat to visit job sites, thank city staff in person, and ask the kind of tough, thoughtful questions that helped us get things right. During his time on council, Jake authored an ordinance to protect all of our public spaces, passionately supported the creation of a park zone, which permanently safeguards Mercer Island's parks and open spaces. He helped fund new playgrounds and pickleball courts, backed major infrastructure investments, and stood firmly behind Mercer Island Youth and Family Services. He gave his full energy and attention, not just showing up, but actively engaging, always working to improve life on the island. Jake believed public service was a responsibility to be earned every day, and he took that seriously. But Jake didn't just serve, he celebrated. He believed in the power of shared experiences and worked to bring them back. When the pandemic forced cancellations, Jake stepped up, donating to help relaunch Summer Celebration. I can still picture him that afternoon in Mercedale Park, grinning as families gathered. Kids laughed at magic shows, and old friends reconnected under the summer sun. I'll never forget how much joy he took in reviving the holiday tree lighting. He stood next to me in front of a crowd of onlookers, sipping cocoa, listening to carolers, and helping lead the countdown as the grand fir lit up in a warm, gentle glow. His smile that night was as bright as the lights themselves. Jake was always the first to ask, how can we make this happen? And then he'd roll up his sleeves and see it through with enthusiasm, generosity, and heart. He also had remarkable ability to bring people together. Jake could disagree without dividing. He listened with genuine interest, welcomed every viewpoint, and often reminded us that even when we cast different votes, we all shared the same goal, to do what was best for Mercer Island. Councilmember Wendy Weicker said it best. Jake never took politics personally. He had a remarkable consistency across his personal, professional, and political life. Even when conversations were difficult, he would reach out. He was such a human-centered public servant, always focused on bringing people together for the greater good. Deputy Mayor David Rosenbaum shared a memory that captured Jake perfectly. He said that the true test of public people is how they treat others when no one is watching. Jake consistently showed up for people in ways both quiet and meaningful. Whether it was dropping off peppers because he remembered you liked them, or hand delivering council packets simply because he could, Jake's small gestures made a big impact. Councilmember Lisa Anderall recalled his sharp wit and dry humor. Jake would often say, especially when he was skeptical, "I may have been born at night, but it wasn't last night." It was a good reminder that for all his warmth and approachability, Jake took the job seriously. He wasn't on council to simply approve what was in front of him. He was there to ask the right questions, offer better solutions, and help shape decisions that truly reflected the hopes and expectations of Islanders. Jake believed in leaving things better than he found them, and Mercer Island is better for having had his guiding hand. Jake inspired others because he lived each day with intention and kindness. He mentored younger leaders, encouraged new voices, and made everyone feel like they belonged. He didn't need to preach his values, he lived them, and in doing so, he raised the bar for all of us. His legacy is everywhere, in the parks and policies he shaped, in the traditions he helped revive, in the quiet acts of generosity that no one asked him to do, but we all remember. We all have a Jake story. For some, it was finding a surprise bouquet of dahlias on the porch. For others, it was seeing him walk his terriers, Nemesis and Jasper, around Homestead Field, waving to everyone he passed. For me, it's remembering how, even after long meetings, he was still smiling, still offering encouragement, still asking what's next. So let's honor Jake, not with words, but with action. Let's listen more. Let's show up for one another. Let's find joy in shared moments. And maybe once in a while, leave a few flowers at someone's door, just as Jake would have done. Jake made Mercer Island kinder, stronger, more connected. And because he walked among us with his big heart and unmistakable twinkle in his eye, we're better off too. Jake, thank you for your service, your friendship, and your example. You'll be dearly missed, but your spirit will stay with us and in the community you loved and served so well. May your memory continue to inspire us, and may you rest peacefully knowing how deeply you're appreciated, admired, and loved.
The world's great religions all have a rich and detailed vision of the afterlife. The Church of Latter-day Saints certainly does. For much of his life, Jake didn't embrace any of those visions. Over the course of his decades, his views of the afterlife evolved in a profound way. For myself, when I think of Jake now, I see him rising to stand his watch at the turn of the hourglass, looking out over the water and waiting for his next great adventure, somewhere just over the horizon. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for contributing to his life. Good day.